On today's podcast, we have Ashley, who is 17. She's a musician and a content creator on TikTok who has become a huge advocate for people or for younger people. You know, she's a teenager. So we're talking to her today to get the perspective of a teenager who has been diagnosed with a multitude of illnesses that a lot of teenagers don't really think about. So Ashley has been diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome or POTS, as well as superior mesenteric artery syndrome. And this episode is about being a teenager with a complex health history and a teenager that feels invisible and is frequently often dismissed within the healthcare system for being too young. Hi, Ashley, and welcome to the podcast today.
Hi, thank you for having me. So happy to be here.
Sure. Very excited to get to chat and learn a little bit more about you. So let's start. Tell everyone who you are. What's your name? How old are you? And what does an ordinary day look like for you right now?
Yes, so my name's Ashley. I'm 17 and I've lived in Nashville my entire life. I've lived in the same little neighborhood and my best friends live right next door. So I do so many things with them. But I just graduated high school and I'm going to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which I'm really excited about. So right now I'm kind of just in my summer break doing as much fun stuff as I can while also making sure I get my health stuff as best under control as I can before I move out of the house.
Sure. And now that you're going to college, do you have an idea of like what you're going to study in college? What are your hopes and goals for that?
I know I have so many different things I'm interested in, which is a problem. I might try to apply into the School of Public Health because clearly I'm very passionate about that. I also love politics and international relations and creative writing. So I think I'm just going to take my time the first few years to explore all my different options and then go from there, see if I could maybe double major. But yeah.
Okay. And then let's talk a little bit about your music because that's a big part of who you are. So when did you
Yes.
start, singing and getting into music? And what does that do for you as a chronically ill patient?
Yes, for sure. So I've kind of played music my whole life. I've always loved it. When I was little, my mom had us do violin and piano, and I started voice lessons at a young age. I always played by ear, so I would never actually learn to read the music, which ended up being great. Once I was a teenager, I started doing more songwriting and I found a studio in downtown Nashville. And so I got to start sharing my songs with people. And I found writing is just a creative outlet for me to express my pain, what I experience in a more artistic way. I think a lot of times it can be hard to communicate that, but if you put it in the form of music, people can kind of digest it more easily. And so that's been a great outlet for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I love playing around town and just sharing my music with people.
That makes sense. And you have beautiful music on your TikTok page. I think
Thank
that's
you.
something that was quite intriguing personally when I reached out because let me not put words in your mouth, but like if somebody were to ask you like outside of the health stuff, who are you? Like how would you identify yourself? I know it's a little bit loaded for a teenager. What would you say to that question? Because to me, you came up as a musician first before like I got to know a little bit more about that. So who are you?
Yeah, well, there's so many different things. I feel like I'm a very logical person, but I'm also a creative, which is kind of a weird combination sometimes. But I don't know, I'm just passionate about a lot. If I find something I care about, I'll go full force at it. I am always down for a spontaneous adventure and I love the arts, but I love academics. There's so many things I just care so deeply for, and I love having those deep conversations with people, finding like deeper meanings in life. That's just really important to me.
All right. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Now let's get into the more serious stuff. What has it been like being a sick teenager? Like, what has illness taken from you as a teenager that a
Yeah.
lot of people will not expect?
Let's see. I feel like on the more basic level, my high school experience looked very different than normal. I love sports. I didn't really get to compete in any throughout high school. I did more of a hybrid method of learning. So I would go to a like co-op or tutorial, as some people call it, 2 days a week. Take some college classes on the other days, but I was never at school for a full day. And that ended up being really helpful because if I had to miss a month of school for surgeries, then I could. And my teachers were flexible with me. And so it's kind of taken the typical high school experience away from me, but I don't really let that bug me at all. I think it's added a lot of depth into my life, made me figure out who I am, what's valuable to me, who are my people at a
Yeah.
much earlier age than people who wouldn't have experienced something like this. So I try not to think about it as something that's taken away from me, but rather just help me mature quicker and figure out what I care about.
Yeah. I think that just sort of leads me into the next question, right? Because a lot of 17-year-olds will probably not even understand some of these diagnoses that you have. So did you ever find yourself becoming like a health educator, like trying to like walk your friends or your classmates through like, well, the reason I'm not at school today is because, I have this very complex sounding issue that I have to address. What did that look like for you?
Yes, absolutely. I feel like there are so many different ways I've had to educate myself and other people on these diagnoses. First, I had to educate myself. So I remember figuring out the possibility of one of my diagnoses and then just like researching for hours about it for like over a month so I could learn as much as I could. And then I don't generally explain a ton to people unless they ask me to. Some people are really interested, and if they are, I get so excited to share, but other people just don't really care to hear. And so it's kind of a matter of how much my classmates are interested in hearing or my teachers. I have found myself explaining a lot to doctors, though. So
Oh.
many doctors don't know about my diagnoses
Mm,
or have maybe heard of them briefly, but don't really put in much effort to understand them on, I don't know, more complex level. And
mm,
so in that way, I've had to explain to them what it looks like in my life or how it feels in my body. So that's been interesting, kind of from a patient chair explaining medicine to a doctor.
mm. Yeah, and I think that just takes us into like the next segment of this, which is like your healthcare experience and like what happens when you're actually in a hospital, right? Like, let's go back before so you sort of had any like diagnosis, before you had any answers. What were you being told was wrong with you, or how were you able to explain what was wrong with you, given that there was so much going on?
Yeah, it was a very difficult time. I mean, it spanned over years. Like, it wasn't a short period of time between getting sick and getting answers, which is often the case for most people. But gosh, I heard so many different things. I heard it's just anxiety and depression because you're a teenage girl. And what more could it be? Which I knew was not the case, but that led to a lot of self doubt about, am I faking my symptoms? Is this actually wrong with me? And then let's see, I heard the gut brain connection, which is a real thing, but wasn't the root cause of my issues. Yeah, I just heard a lot of your pain is over exaggerated, or it's not worth trying to fix, or your pain just doesn't exist, period.
That's very interesting. And like I would assume in Nashville you're still considered a minor, yes?
Yes.
So a lot of these conversations were they with you directly or like with your parents there? What were these doctor appointments like?
Yeah, so I've had appointments all over the country.
Oh.
So I think one conversation I remember in particular was local.
Mhm.
It was with a female GI doctor, and my mom was in the room, and I was in the room with this doctor, and I kind of went in, presented my case, which I hate to say that. It sounds like something in law, like you're presenting your case to them to try to make them believe you. And it shocked me that it was a female doctor. And she told my mom to sneak antidepressants into my food because that would be the problem solver. And I remember just sitting there, taking that in and saying no. I feel like that was kind of like a moment for me where I thought, okay, this system is so messed up. Why is she telling my mom this? She actually sent me out of the room at one point to talk to my mom about that. Luckily, my mom did not do any of that. She told me the whole conversation later. But yeah, there were conversations like that.
Mhm.
There were some with, surgeons over Zoom who would say, we can see you have this clear anatomical issue, but I don't think you look sick enough to get surgery. So that's also been weird for me to balance,
Yeah.
hearing you do have a problem, but we won't fix it.
Did any of the doctors ever try to tell you that you had like an eating disorder with your SMAS?
There was some weight loss for me, but nothing too extreme. They would say like, oh, it's anxiety, and
Yeah,
she's like intentionally. I was never told, oh, like you have an eating disorder,
yeah,
from what I can remember.
yeah. And when you finally got like a medical diagnosis for some of these illnesses that you had, how did you feel? Like, did that come as a relief to you, or were you just like, well, I told you? Because at a certain point you can get gaslit so much that you start doubting yourself, right? You start thinking like, is this
Mhm.
my body like playing tricks on me? So when
Yeah.
you finally got this, like, walk us through that, the experience of, like, did you get all of your diagnoses at once? Was this like a concurrent thing? Like, how did that feel like when you finally were able to have like a very targetable disease that you knew that could, okay, now this was a starting point for treatment?
So it definitely was not all at once. I've gotten the 3 diagnoses you mentioned, plus some others over the span of several years. So in ninth grade, I got my diagnosis with POTS.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, okay, finally we have some answers. But I also told my mom, I said, this is not the whole issue. I know there's something more. POTS is a horrible thing, but it doesn't explain everything I'm experiencing or the pain that's this severe. And so I felt some relief having a doctor believe me. I think that's where the relief came from. But I knew I needed to keep looking for answers. When I got my SMAS diagnosis, I was so relieved to finally have someone believe me, because there's a time period between getting a scan or a test that shows what the issue is and then getting a diagnosis.
Mhm.
So that took months for me for SMAS. I went to doctors in between that time who said, I can see the problem, but we won't diagnose you. So getting a diagnosis was a big relief. But for other things like Ehlers-Danlos, there's not really a cure. And so it can kind of be, I don't know, it's tricky to navigate emotionally. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to live with this the rest of my life. But I also know that this is a problem, and I can now try to find different ways to manage it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
again, I think that that sort of takes us into the next part, which is trying to understand these different illnesses explained by someone who has them, and not just like explained from like a medical perspective. And I think that the way that you want to be able to share about these diseases is, if some other fellow teenager had this diagnosis, how would you explain that to them in like teenager, not slang,
Yeah.
as somebody who like lives this? And we can break this down, right? Let's start with Ehlers-Danlos. What does
Yes.
that look like, and how does that show up in your day-to-day life?
Yes. So Ehlers-Danlos is a genetic connective tissue disorder, and connective tissue is found everywhere in your body. People think of it as just being in your skin and your joints, which it is, but it also lines your organs and your blood vessels. Your tendons and ligaments have connective tissue. So it's really everywhere in the body. And the building blocks of connective tissue is something called collagen, and your collagen isn't strong enough, kind of say it's faulty. It can look so different in every single person that has it. Some people, I've personally grew up breaking so many bones or tearing ligaments all the time, but it's also showed up in the form of more internal issues like vascular compressions. So SMAS is one, or May-Thurner syndrome, Nutcracker syndrome. There are so many different vascular issues that are a product of Ehlers-Danlos.
Mhm.
So it can't look the same in every person, but there are lots of different types that can kind of affect you, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Okay. And let's go down to one of the ways that this can show up. You mentioned about SMAS. So what, it's one of those diseases that almost no one knows about it, unless probably you have like Ehlers-Danlos and then like you sort of manifest as that. So what is it, and what does it do to you? How does that affect
Yes. So it stands for superior mesenteric artery syndrome. So you have an abdominal aorta
you?
and then a superior mesenteric artery. And right through this area, you have the first portion of your small intestine called the duodenum.
Mhm.
And when you lose the fat pad between these two arteries, it kind of clamps down. Like the angle is a lot less than it would be. And that causes a blockage. So it makes it really difficult for food and liquid to pass through. It can lead to a lot of nausea and vomiting, but I know people with SMAS that do not have vomiting, which is very interesting. But I would say the worst symptom for me was the pain. I would throw up a lot, but the pain is pretty sharp, unbearable. So yeah, that's kind of a very brief explanation for SMAS.
Very brief. And do you feel like you're really good at human biology now?
My
But
anatomy class was a breeze.
your anatomy is so good right now. But okay, and then let's talk about POT.
Yes.
What does a POT episode you feel like, as somebody that is experiencing this?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people think of POTS as something where you just faint. Like you pass out and that's about it, which is not true. I mean, you definitely can pass out with POTS. That is a symptom for a lot of people, but it's so much more than that. It's a form of dysautonomia. So your autonomic nervous system kind of controls all your involuntary bodily functions, things like heart rate, blood pressure, sweating, digestion. So when it's dysregulated, POTS, you're kind of in a fight or flight mode all the time. And so when you stand up or change bodily positions, like your blood pressure drops and your heart rate and response gets really high. But you can have nausea, vomiting, dizziness, fatigue. That's a big one. So many different symptoms that show up differently in people.
Okay, interesting lesson. Now, how do you think that all of these three diseases connect, if at all you think that they connect? And why do you think that they tend to like travel together? Because it's pretty explanatory in terms of like how Ehlers-Danlos breaks down into SMAS, but heart seems kind of like a different standalone disease in here, but it's not. And have you ever like had a conversation with like your doctor in terms of like why all of these things are sort of showing up together?
Yes, it's a bit of a loaded question that we're still trying to figure out.
Mhm.
So I want to throw in one more thing called mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS, because that is seen with Ehlers-Danlos and POTS all the time. Typically, if you have one or two, you will have the other. Not always, but I recently met with a doctor in New York who was so well educated on this, and there are like endless ways that they connect to each other. So with MCAS, your mast cells are present a lot in your GI system and around your blood vessels, which can affect vascular compressions. With Ehlers-Danlos, because your tissue is a lot weaker, it's a lot more easy for it to kind of collapse onto itself. That might be a bad way to put it. And vascular compressions can worsen POTS because you're having more difficulty getting blood back to your heart if a vein is compressed. So your blood flow is worse. They're very strongly connected. If you have some, I would look into the others.
Sure. And the reason why I'm asking this is because obviously, you're probably about the third patient I'm speaking to with Ehlers-Danlos. And what I've noticed is that's usually just like the broader manifestation of so many other problems that are never caught or caught later over time. So as somebody who has also had this, why do you think that this happens? Why do you think that like this different combination of problems gets missed so often? Do you think that is just like the complexity of the disease or lack of understanding of the disease? Because you got diagnosed with POTS, but you knew that that was not it. You knew that something else was missing. Why do you think that that gets missed a lot?
I think a big part of it is a lack of education in medical schools. Ehlers-Danlos is very rarely mentioned. Mast cell activation syndrome, very rarely mentioned. And there's a phrase, when you hear the sound of hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. In med school, students are constantly being trained to look for the most common thing or diagnosis. And these things aren't super common, although POTS is pretty common, and I think a lot more people have Ehlers-Danlos than what's being documented. So I really think it's a lack of understanding about the disease. You can't really teach people unless you know about it, but there's so much to be uncovered. Like, I believe MCAS has only been studied for like a few decades, and Ehlers-Danlos, like, we still haven't figured out the genetic markers for some of the kinds. So it's just so complex that it's hard to understand and then teach.
Understood. And talking about like the genetic component of this, did you have to do like genetic testing to be able to like get your diagnosis? And in that case, Like, do you know if there was a history of this disease in the family? Like, because obviously genetic means that it runs through your bloodline. But first of all, I think my first question is, did you ever have to do like a genetic profiling to get this confirmation? And was this something that was known to be in the family that was probably missed? Did your parents ever fill you in on that?
Yeah, so I did do genetic testing a few times through, and basically they figured out the markers for all the different subtypes of Ehlers-Danlos except for hypermobile. I didn't have any of the subtype or genetic markers for those other subtypes, so we narrowed it down to hypermobile. And there are a lot of other tests you can do to kind of see if you fit into that diagnosis. And so some of my siblings and my mom ended up doing them, and they did end up getting a diagnosis after me. So I was kind of the first one to figure out. And then we realized because it's genetic, the rest of your family might have it too.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. And if, let's just say there's a doctor watching this somehow, what do you wish that, doctors understood about how some of these diseases show up in young people, right? Because again, there's so many different things that this could have been misinterpreted for. What would you want a doctor to sort of like keep at the back of their minds, to understand how this disease will show up in somebody who is as young as you?
There's so much I wish I could say to doctors out there. I think, first of all, we aren't faking our symptoms. If pain is constant.
Yeah.
I have a very different baseline than the average person. I have a very high pain tolerance because of all of this. And if I tell you I'm in pain, that means it's a lot of pain because I've learned to cope with it. And that's been the case for most people who I've met with these conditions. Just because I'm able to go to school or I look healthy, or I work out doesn't mean I'm not still experiencing all of the symptoms I'm describing. And you don't have to look deathly sick to be sick.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Let's talk about your advocacy, right? A lot of people will get sick and like become recluse, feel sorry for themselves. What made you decide to start talking about this publicly? What made you brave enough to think, you know what, let me share about what I'm going through?
I never really wanted to in the first place. And then I decided one day, it was the month I was getting my first surgery for SMAS. I thought, I haven't seen any information out there about this, literally anywhere. Nobody knows. Maybe if I just post one video, I could make a slight difference for somebody. That video ended up getting, I think, over 100,000 views, and I got so many DMs from people asking questions and saying, I've never heard about another person having this. Can you tell me more? I ended up getting to meet some of them later on, and I feel like seeing how fulfilling that was for me and how much just sharing your story or a few facts about a condition could drastically impact another person's life. Not because I did something great, but it's just as simple as how, social media works. Um, I think I realized, okay, there's a purpose behind me sharing my story. And I ended up meeting some people through that, in this online community, and we kind of were able to encourage each other. One of them started a nonprofit that I've been able to do a lot of work with. And I think just having that encouragement from a community of other people dealing with, similar problems in the medical industry and having similar, feelings in their body that very few people could understand has really kind of boosted me to keep advocating and sharing my story.
You mentioned that you've been able to meet people. Like, have you been able to meet people in real life, or like, do you guys have like a community that like meets up? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I've actually only met a few people in person, which is funny because I feel like I know so many of them so well. Um, but there are like a lot of cool Facebook groups out there for SMAS or Ehlers-Danlos that you can kind of talk to people through. A lot of it came through just following each other on social media and liking the work that each other was doing. And now we like FaceTime each other and get to do advocacy work together. So those relationships have really grown just through the power of social media.
That makes sense. It's one of those things whereby you learn how to build your own community, right? Being young and being like, okay, I'll find my own people who understand this and then like sort of interact with them, which again is not always something that we see with younger people, because like with a lot of younger people, being sick and like tends to affect like people's mental health a lot and how they show up for themselves. So I guess just to touch a little bit on your music, does a lot of your music center around being sick, or do you like use music as an escape to be like, I don't want to think about being sick, so I'm gonna do something else, you know?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. It kind of depends on what I'm going through at that time. So, like, I have certain albums or songs that I'll listen to in the hospital, or I'll write some, I don't know, really deep songs about what I'm feeling or going through. But then there are other times where I write about completely different subjects. I think a lot of times it is about personal experiences and finding a way to put my pain into words because it can be so difficult to express that to other people. So I think even if I am writing about my struggles, it still feels like an escape, even though like I'm still centered in that, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And let's talk about being in the hospital for a bit. Let's just touch on that. Myself included, I only have a PCP, right? Like I've never been to like a specialist or anything that my PCP could handle. How does your health coordination look like? Do you have different specialists that you work with? Like, what does that look like for you whenever you need to like get a checkup or when something is happening? Is that very coordinated, or do you have to make a lot of effort to like coordinate your care across all these different moving parts?
It's really my mom who does all the coordination, but I have a phenomenal PCP in Nashville. And so if I need to get like a CT for something or an MRI, she can order that through my local hospital for me.
Okay.
But outside of that, I just have specialists all over. That has been interesting is traveling to meet with so many different specialists. So I have like one in New York. I've had surgeons in Kansas City and Connecticut. So I kind of find based on the specific issue, whoever can help me the most with that.
Yeah.
So like it really just depends on the surgery I'm looking for or the treatment option that I need.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I mean, that was just my personal curiosity to try to
Yeah.
understand how that works, but shout out to your mom, huh?
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about, what you've learned, right? Like what do you know about your body now that you wish that you'd known earlier? Like how have you learned to understand, for example, like if you want to work out, how do you know when to push and when to stop, right? Like if you want to, I don't know, go out hiking with your friends or whatever, how do you know like what your limits are? Or is that something that you've come to learn about your body? Or do things still just like surprise you from time to
I
time?
think, yeah, it's constantly a learning process for me. I think I've learned a lot in this last year. I started meeting with a physical therapist who's been very helpful, who understands all of my diagnoses. And so, even something about like as simple as if your body starts shaking within the first set of, I don't know, an exercise, because I like lifting weights and stuff like that, then you might need to go down and wait because that's putting your system in a fight or flight mode, and mine's already overly activated, so maybe not the best move. But with things such as hiking and just going on fun outings, I think I just kind of have to be aware in the moment. And if I'm starting to notice myself getting dizzy, my vision going blurry, or a lot of pain, I just have to tell the people I'm with, hey, I need a minute. I need some sodium, I need some water, and to elevate my legs. And then a lot of times I pick back up.
Mm.
But I think I need to be a little more aware of my body. I think I push myself a little too hard sometimes and try to ignore the fact that I do have chronic illness.
That makes sense. And I mean, it also sort of comes down to the fact that you're going to college, right? You're going to
Yes.
probably have the ultimate college experience, but then you're going to meet all these new groups of people that you probably have to start explaining why you can't like just like go at a music festival, for example, or whatever. Are you looking forward to that? How do you anticipate preparing for this next phase in your life?
Yeah, I'm definitely a little bit nervous about that, but I feel like I've met so many new people in the last 4 years of my life. I don't know, I feel like I've gotten pretty good at explaining and knowing when the right time is to explain these things to people. I've already met one girl from my area going to the same college as me, and I've already explained it all to her because she was curious.
Yeah.
So I think it's a matter of finding people and building relationships where there is a level of curiosity and understanding, even if they don't physically feel what I'm feeling. Still, just I don't know. It's a level of empathy, or sympathy,
Yeah.
depending on the person.
Yeah. That makes sense. So let's talk about what's next, right? What are you looking forward to in terms of, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, like, wanting to pursue probably like public health, but like other than that, what are you looking forward to with like your music, maybe your content, maybe your advocacy, ambitions? What does that look like for you, say, in the next 12 months?
Yes. I think there's so many things I want to do. I want to keep building my platform. That's really what I want, is just to have a platform of some sorts, whether that be through social media or music or my job down the road, whatever it may look like, just to get my message out there. So I'm sure I'll keep posting on social media and sharing those stories. I'm hoping to maybe record some music, maybe release it. We'll see what the next year or so holds. But yeah, I think ultimately I'm just going to keep talking as much as I can about this issue because I think it needs to be heard.
And also we know, Ashley, that you are an artist. So would you be open to playing something for us real quick?
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Yes.
Let's hear it.
This is the first verse and chorus of an original I wrote called I Forgive You. Try to clean slate, but the marks still stain my heart. Buried the hatchet, yet still couldn't find a fresh start. You were wrong, and I'm stuck blaming you for the loss. I'm not trying to kiss and make up. Oh, I forgive you, but no, never forget the hell I went through. It stuck on me, how you let it be. The pain you brought is my worst enemy. It takes all my strength. I forgive you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That was
Of
so
course.
beautiful. And your passion
Yeah.
really like shines through. And,
Thank you.
again, another reason why we do this is because chronic illness doesn't define people. You're more of an artist than a patient, and like being a patient is just one of the things that you have to deal with. So thank you so much for sharing this with me
Of
today and for
course.
sharing that. I think we've come to the end of this, but is there anything that you think you'd want to share before we wrap up? Probably, advice to another teenager who they must not have the same problem as you, but just a teenager out there who's struggling with like not being heard or not being believed or going through some sort of illness, and they just are like fighting it out. What would you tell them as a way to wrap this up so that that can help keep them motivated to come out of it on the other end, just as you have?
Yeah, I would say your pain is real. Don't doubt that just because you're being told. Don't doubt the severity of it. I've experienced really severe pain that I can't believe I have come to the other side of. I still experience some today, but just never doubt what you know you're experiencing in your body, and don't let that get in your head. Keep using your voice, and if somebody doesn't believe you, find another person who will. Yeah, that's what I'd
Yeah.
say.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for being so brave and sharing your story with me. And, I'm very inspired by not only your age, but all the things that you've had to go through at such a young age. And I hope that this resonates with anyone else that is watching this. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.